Okay, welcome to a little review of day one of Uvalde's 18-meter championship in July of 2011. Show you a couple things here just to lay the groundwork. The task for this first day ended up being won by Bruce Taylor, who ended up winning the competition. Bruce Taylor is from Australia. He was flying an ASG-29. It's pretty interesting to watch his flight today. Started very late and made up a ton of ground. Jersey from Canada, fourth in the last 18-meter World Championship, also flew well, started early, and flew a very nice task. Bill Elliott also started late with Bruce Taylor, and had a solid task as well. Brad Edwards from Australia, Bruce's teammate Gary Ittner, Al Tyler had solid tasks, and then I'm in seventh here. I'm a relatively new glider pilot and new to racing for sure. This is my third contest and had a real nice day, although the mistakes that I made were pretty easy to follow, and it's interesting analyzing this flight how big they were. Derek Mackey, my friend from Canada, also in a LAC 17A, flew we started very close together and actually finished very close together, although he opened up some pretty big leads during the flight. And then Jermaine Francois from the Netherlands and his teammate, can't pronounce your name, sorry there, we'll call him Delta Echo, flew very close to them throughout the flight. Nick Bonaire from Montreal, Canada, had a very good task but got into a couple little areas of trouble, and Alpha Bravo, Ox from Canada, and Dennis Lincoln, who unfortunately landed out in this task, starting late. Okay, so back over to, well, before I go over to CU, it was a start down to the south towards Laredo to turn point 14, Chaparosa, and then 7, which is sort of to the west of Uvalde, Bracketville, and then well up to the north into the hill country junction, and then back to Uvalde for the finish. 5-mile cylinder roughly for the start, 1-mile cylinders. This was a assigned task, and 2-mile for the finish. Actually, I think it was in kilometers, but I can't remember specifically. So here's what the task looked like, just to give you a little framework of where we are. Let's see how far I can zoom out here. 500 miles might give us a good look here. Okay, so here we are, San Antonio to the west, or sorry, to the east. Dallas up here somewhere. Dallas might be further. Yep, here's Dallas, Fort Worth, to give you an idea of where we are. So we're down here flying out of Uvalde, San Antonio just to the west, and Laredo over here is obviously Mexico. We flew a number of tasks well down into the Laredo area and out into this area. There was huge sea breeze fronts out of Corpus Christi that were workable but never really came into play. And then up here you have the hill country, which is fairly unlandable, fairly nervous, especially for a new guy like me, and made for some pretty exciting flying. So this is a program called CU. CU is a way of viewing multiple IGC files, which are files recorded from the gliders on board computers. They're certified scoring computers, and they track the flight, track the GPS tracks of each flight, and then compile them and run them together, synchronized based on time. And that's what we're using here. This is a 2D view, but I prefer the 3D view. And let's get started. You can see the colors here before we get going are coordinated. A little hard to see, but hopefully you can follow along. And then I have the camera tracked on Fox 2, which is myself. So here we are, we're looking south, and let's get started. Zoom in a little bit. Okay, so the traces are, I believe, 2 minutes behind the glider and 5 minutes in front of the glider. So you can see where the glider is going to be in 3 or 4 minutes. It doesn't look like it's a full 5 minutes. Before the start, and the start is defined 5,000 feet high, and you can see this radius here, this red radius around Uvalde. Start circle is GPS south, which is obviously south of the Uvalde area, and a 5-mile radius around it, roughly. Before the start, the gliders are searching around for as many thermals as they can, so they can sample them and try and get an idea of what the expected climb rate for a good thermal is for the day. If you're getting 5-knot thermals at your peak and a lot of 2 or 3 knotters during the race, you want to try and find 5-knot thermals. And that's exactly what happened today. Before the start, there was an occasional 5-knot thermal, and there was a lot of 2 and 3-knot thermal averages. And you can see here all the data for the flight. This is what's happening in real time, and it's obviously synchronized. So if a glider gets a climb here, Tango Tango Derek Mackey has a 2.1 average climb, X-Ray Golf Jersey has a 3.9. So the gliders are getting as many of these thermals as they can and understanding what the best ones are and what the worst ones are on average. And on the course, during the task, they're going to try and minimize the 2-knot thermals and maximize the number of 5-knot thermals. And the fastest pilot will have very few 2-knot thermals. It makes for the overall average speed much more efficiently. Thermals are like pit stops in auto racing. You gain energy and then can use that energy to go on for another bit of distance. The longer it takes you to fill that energy, it's a slower pit stop and waste time. The faster you build the energy, the stronger the thermal, the faster the pit stop and the less wasted time. In glider flying, there's also the aspect of flying as straight of a course to the next turn point as you can, rather than weaving around, and being efficient, finding the thermal quickly, climbing to the top, and exiting without wasting a lot of time. So, sort of keep following along here. You can see I'm well outside of the turn point area, trying to sample thermals as widely as I can, and you'll see here, if I pause, that a couple guys are already out on course, or getting close to getting out on course. The way a glider race works, in not a Grand Prix race, but in a normal task such as this, or the Worlds, which will be here in Uvalde next year, is they open a start gate at a particular time, and each glider picks their time to start. So the way the rule works is generally you want to start later than the other gliders, have a better start, catch up, use them to find thermals initially and become more efficient then finding the thermals, catch up, and then pass them, and obviously get a faster time around the track. The overall contest task is scored based on an average speed over an exact distance. This is a assigned task, so everyone's going basically to the exact same point, and it's simply the time around the track. And you can see here the winning time of 2:49 and the slowest time of 3:55, over an hour slower. The majority of the pilots finished here within roughly a half hour, but you can see there's a pretty big spread there in both time and obviously average speed. So let's go back to the racing. And here's Fox 2. You're seeing a lot of the gliders begin to kind of coagulate together into what's called a gaggle. And the reason they do that is you can climb more efficiently with other gliders in the same climb, because each can use the others to tell whether one particular glider at one particular point in that thermal, or even in that thermal turn, if they're at the same altitude, is climbing faster than the others. And then each glider can adjust their turns based on the information that they're seeing with the gliders around them. And obviously it's a good way to go. The risk is that obviously there can be a collision. So real quick here, you can see the time of day is 1941. I think that's Zulu time. It's roughly 1 o'clock, maybe 1:30. And the start gate is already opened, and you can see that many of the gliders have already started. X-Ray Golf is on his way. Romeo and Dee from the Netherlands have started and are flying together as a team. The Americans have just started, the American team, and off they go down this track here towards the first turn point, and Ox and Alpha Bravo are well down the track. QV, Bruce Taylor, who wins the day, is waiting back as long as he can, and also Dennis Lincoln is holding back as well. So here I am. I happen to be with Derek Mackey, who is in the exact same glider. The difference, he has some advanced winglets on his glider, and I have a ventilation system on my glider, and roughly the same performance, exact same basic glider. Also Sierra Tango, another LAC 17A from Canada, has started the test just before us. So here is the sort of start line. It goes up 5,000 feet. You have to start below that altitude, and otherwise you get a penalty. So here we go. And Derek and I are tanking up, and off we go, off into the task area, starting right about now. And a long run here. First climb we weren't very happy with, and then for an odd reason we sort of split up. Derek went well off course, back up to the northwest, and I stayed on course. And you can see pretty weak climb here at 2.1, not what you want to see off the start of a glider race. It would have been much nicer to get a 5-knot climb, or at least a 4, and a strong average climb. Derek here is also struggling a little bit with a miss, and then gets a small climb here. So not an ideal start for us. The Americans off the screen to the right. Jersey climbing up nicely off the first turn point. So here we are down near the first turn point. I averaged out here on another weak climb, 2.1 knots, but did better than Derek here, who didn't really get too much of a climb. And I still haven't quite entered the turn point cylinder yet, so I'm a little bit short of it. Nick Bonaire has touched the turn point and is leaving. It's sort of interesting here. I'm getting blown away from the turn point. It would have probably been better to hit the turn point first than stop for that weak climb before. So here we are, sort of setting up for what the rest of the task is going to be. Dee and Romeo went well off course on the sort of the first leg, and I started well behind them, and here I am ahead of them, which is a good considering they're much more experienced pilots. But here's Bruce Taylor, who started well behind us and hardly circled on the first leg. I think he made one little effort and a turn. Here he is, only a mile behind and at the same altitude, and rumbling down the leg here at 138 knots, 138 miles per hour, versus my 113. So lots of hints and clues here. On the first leg I made 2 or 3 stupid turns and didn't really climb well. And here he is, he's probably already made up 3 or 4 minutes on me, or perhaps more. And he's going to continue to sort of punish us throughout the day, but it's a good lesson learned here. Nick has found a solid thermal. You can tell that it's a real crisp thermal, and when it's strong it's less affected by the gradient wind, and has a little bit less of a slope to it. Let's keep going and sort of see what happens here, but you can sort of see what's setting up. JS1's closing up as well. He started late, and Derek's back here at the first turn point, still climbing, but comes back here real nicely. So here we go. And I always like to stop in my climbs and sort of see what I'm doing. So Romeo and Dee from the Netherlands have joined me. Bruce sampled our thermal and said, "See you later, not good enough for me." And here comes Derek into the same thermal. Only a 2-knot average for Fox 2, for Dee 2.1, and for Romeo not very good as well. He's just starting the turn. But the big thing to learn here is Bruce Taylor takes off and says, "See you later." So he does that to us in a few thermals. So there he hopped into a thermal. It's sort of worth noting that he did have one bad thermal there. and made what looks like 5 turns before he takes off to do more. And here's Derek taking a sample of that same thermal, and Romeo D and Fox 2 keep on trucking. So here we all are together again. Only 2.7 knots, still not a solid climb over 3 knots, and sort of one leg down the track. Here comes Bruce Taylor, who's essentially caught us now, and Romeo only 2.7 knots as well, and D even worse, 1.9 knots there, sort of off-centered on a different track on his climb. And Derek, oddly enough, is right with Bruce Taylor. So here we go, and let's stop right here. You can see Bruce continuing to fly about 130 knots, and I'm going about the same speed. Derek is, where's Derek? He's back there still climbing. Or no, he's pulling up through a bump there, and all the speeds seem roughly reasonable here for these 5 players. Alright, so into the next thermal. Derek got in and out pretty quick on that. Bruce, another couple turns, didn't like what he saw under Nick Bonair's thermal, and keeps on trucking. Back up to, again, 137 miles per hour. And Fox 2 is back here and 3 knots. Still kind of a weak climb. And D's got 3.4 and Romeo 3.6. So probably, Bruce started out back here a couple miles behind. Now here he is a couple miles ahead. Roughly the same altitude for all intents and purposes. Beating us up pretty bad. So there comes JS1, dead even with us, and jumps into the first turn point represented by that red circle. So here we are, another climb. Fox 2. Looks like we've already left the thermal. Go back a little bit and see where I got. Only 2.2 knots. So far I think I've had a lot of approximately 2 knot average thermals, and that's not phenomenal for Uvalde. Pretty poor thermal selection, or pretty poor technique compared to Bruce, who is climbing away here at 5 knots. So he's jumped out roughly 1.5 miles ahead and is higher, and climbing in 5 knots, almost double the value of anything I've had yet today. So off we go into the next thermal, and this one looks pretty solid, 5.5 knots. So my first decent thermal of the day. Unfortunately, out here is Bruce Taylor, and JS1 is already up top in the same thermal, and looks like another massive thermal up there for Bruce Taylor. Let's see, Derek is already climbed up here a little bit, didn't have a very good thermal, and he's chasing down Nick Bonair, and Romeo and D are going to come into the same thermal with me. I'm going to slow this down just a little bit so I can keep up with it. So here it's just running, and each time you see the gliders pulling back, basically what they're doing is as they're going through lift, you want to slow down through that lift so that it spends more time helping you rise, and then drop the nose and accelerate. And you can see here that definitely coming out with more speed and higher than you would have if you didn't pull up at all. That's at least the technique. It's called dolphining or bumping. So here we are. Let's look at the cruise speed, 115 knots for Fox 2. We're starting to come out into unlandable hill country to the north of Uvalde. There's small fields to land in, but a lot of gliders got knocked up. trying to land in fields that weren't ideal or were too narrow for the wingspan, and we're in 18-meter gliders, so we're pretty big and have to be careful. So my feeling here was I was a little nervous, and definitely happy to have some guys flying close by. Although JS1 pretty soon is going to be over the horizon ahead, and not much help, but I'm able to stick with Romeo and D. Alright, so let's pause here before we enter this thermal. Derek is in the middle of his climb, Tango Tango at 2.9, so kind of a medium thermal for the day. QV is way down the track. Nick Bonaire found a huge 5-knot climb here, 5.2 knot average climb, and is doing well further to the north. And QV is just launched, well higher and huge long runs and good thermal selection. That's Bruce Taylor. So here we go, our group going up. Let's stop and see who's climbing better. 2.9 average for Sean, Fox 2, D 3.8, and Romeo 3.3. So they got the better of me here, as they usually did throughout the day when we were close. And quarter mile, we jump into another climb, 3.4, roughly, a reasonable climb for the day, but not great. Now, off in the distance, you have Quebec Victor climbing. Is he in that climb yet? It's hard to see. He's just about to get into his climb. And let's see what his average is. There, another 5.3 knot climb. So just about every thermal, but one or two so far throughout this flight, he's been at over 5 knots. And almost every thermal for mine this flight has been 2.5, roughly. I mean, 5.5. So if you add that up, that's probably 10 to 15 minutes of his overall gain in this task. Checking in here, ST, Nick Bonaire is working farther north, and where's Derek? Derek's down a little low, just about to enter a decent climb here over with JS1. Okay, let's keep going. So here's another set of wasted turns, only 1.9 knots there. I did climb up a little bit and sort of broken off the line of Romeo and Delta Echo. Here's Bruce Taylor, here's Ox and Nick Bonaire, and over here is Derek climbing up with JS1, so they're still locked together. And passing Romeo and D there, they made the same mistake. Now there, Romeo and D find a better climb, I think 5 knots, and I'm at 3 here. So let's look. Ox and Sierra Tango 3.6 knots. QV's not to climb. TT and JS1 are higher and running, and back here Romeo and D have a little bit stronger climb, 4.5 and 3.6 respectively to my, well, I've actually got a better climb here, 4.2. Odd how the wind shift is different here. It looks like my wind is out of the west, and their wind is out of a different direction, just based on the slope of the climbs. But look at the distance that Bruce Taylor has put on us. He was even with us just 30-40 miles ago. So a decent climb there. Dropped off to 2.8 near the top. Bruce Taylor probably would have left at that point. I stuck with it. Let's see, Bruce climbing, so let's take a look at his climb. Scroll back here just a little. Tango Tango in a 4-knotter, so a couple thousand feet above me here in 4 knots. And Bruce Taylor's climb was a weak one for him, 2.8 knots. And here come Romeo and D, who will link up with me here in this next climb. So here I am, a 4.2 knot climb, very solid. And whoa, I just noticed something. There goes Derek, pretty far off course. So he took a big left turn and went across the rum line over the top of our thermal. Must have seen something over here and it didn't quite work out, but that probably cost him some time down the course. And there's Sierra Tango, and there's Bruce. So continuing the climb, I'm averaging 4.2, D39. I'm a little bit better climb than they are, slightly offset to my thermal. And here is another really long run, and I just like to look at the pace. There's JS1. He's climbed higher. He's going 167 knots over the ground, almost red line. QV always consistent, about 135. I'm consistently flying slower at 109, Romeo 115, and D 128. So it could be that I'm just a little slow there, but I'm just noticing that these guys are flying faster all the time. ST at 134, and just for the sake of it, Ox at the same speed, 125. So I'm learning that I'm flying slower on average in cruise than these guys. Okay, Romeo, D, and Fox 2 in a climb. 3.6 knots for Fox 2 average, D 3.1, and Romeo 3. So could be possibly because I came in last and it's easier for me to center, but yeah, it looks like D had to offset a little bit, and also Romeo had to offset a little bit, and I entered pretty cleanly. So a little bit better average climb rate for me there by being last. And just really painful to look at here. Here's QV, over 5 miles down the track. JS1 as well, still probably going like a rocket. Now he's slowed down a little bit. Tango Tango, pretty far down the track and a little higher. Let's see, his trace here is higher than where we're exiting this thermal. But oddly enough, I catch Sierra Tango and pass Sierra Tango and catch up and barely pass Tango Tango from this position, and so does D and Romeo. So here we are exiting out the top. It's always better to leave right with them rather than climb and give them more space in case they come into a large climb and they'll lose touch. Now here I stopped. I saw something and just bent right away from their track, and here I'm going up at 3.8. And Bruce is around the turn point already, which is probably 5 to 8 miles ahead, just killing us. You can see the US pack here, and X-Ray Golf jersey. Alpha Bravo that started very early, Ox that started very early, ST's over here in a 5-knot climb. So here we are entering into the final turn point. So D and Romeo here found a 5-knot climb, and I'm fortunate to come in close enough to be able to bump up and get almost to their height. And let's just look forward here and see what's going on. So Alpha Bravo and JS1 in a large climb here, coming just out of the final turn point. Sierra Tango and Ox just about rounding the turn point, and Tango Tango is in here somewhere as well. So we're at over 9,000 feet there, so pretty high going into this. There's Tango Tango just rounding the turn point. And you can see the gliders bumping along together. And here we go around in the turn point. So as we enter this climb, ST, just for values, we'll assume it's about right. A pretty major climb, 4.7 knots. And D is at 5.1, Romeo at 3, and Fox 2 at 4. So a solid climb out of this turn point, and we've managed to close up pretty good on Tango Tango and ST, even though they had a good climb rate. It must be that they came in lower. Probably 2 miles ahead there for Tango Tango, and roughly the same altitude. There's a little bit of a miss for Derek, 3 turns and no real climb. Here's Tango Tango right behind Derek. JS1 and Alpha Bravo over here further to the east. And here Ox pulls into a thermal, and we pull in with Sierra Tango, and here we all are together. And let's look at these rates. 3.4 for Fox 2, 3.2 for Romeo, and 3.6 for D. So 3.5 knot are there, and we've basically caught up to Tango Tango, the highest. Sierra Tango's really already leaving here, and Fox 2 and Romeo just behind. So again, 2 LAC 17As, Sierra Tango and Derek Mackey and Tango Tango jumping out ahead here. Then the Netherlands brothers and Fox 2 just watching to see what's going on. So here we go, jumping into the next climb. 2.5 knots, sort of weak. Derek blew through it after a couple turns, and Romeo and D considerably higher than I am right now. It's a pretty crappy thermal choice here, it looks like. So a couple of flat turns for me, and I've definitely lost some major ground on Romeo and D at this point, but Sierra Tango I've caught up to. So I'm gaining in the run here a little bit, it looks like, with Romeo and D. Good news. And there's Derek still out ahead. And 2 turns that didn't really pan out for Derek, so that's probably part of the reason we catch him here. So there's a few more turns, another turn that he didn't really like, and then bang, we jump into this. So let's see what we get. Alright, so 4.1 for Fox 2, Romeo at 2.8, D at 4.2, and Derek's over there at 3. So we're getting a not greater climb rate than Derek, and he's maybe 300-400 feet higher than us, but by the top of this climb we're probably together with him because we found a little bit better climb rate in the same neighborhood. Behind us, it's worth noting that Ox was on this line and saw something over here, but made a 90-degree turn and went up and found some sort of reasonable climb. But he made a huge deviation to get to it. And Nick Benair also made a little bit of a deviation, but looks like he found a huge climb there, but that deviation eventually costs him. So it looks like we're roughly at the same altitude, maybe a little higher, but we're together in a pack, and that probably helps us all. And Nick's alone over there a little bit. So here we are catching Derek to the top of this climb, a little stronger average, and when we all exit, well, we're all pretty much together, actually a little bit ahead. And one more climb coming up here, sadly to say for me, an inexperienced guy. Bruce, who started 5 minutes behind, is now pretty dang close to finishing, maybe 15 miles ahead, and has just crushed us. Over here, pretty much the same thing, although he's taking quite a deviation, is JS1, and our group obviously staying together there. So here we go into what might be the last climb. So let's pause here. Where did Derek go? Derek's in there at the same altitude and just maybe turned the wrong way, but 4.8 knots. So again, one of the strongest climbs of the day. 4.4 for D. Derek gets 5.1 for Derek, huge climb, and Romeo 3.9. So here we go, pretty much final glide at the end of this climb, and off Romeo and D go. And at this point, sort of interesting to say, I've got these guys right in front of me, and I assume I have a little bit better glide ratio than they do. This is an ASW26 and this is a Ventus A, and I put the hammer down here trying to catch them, and I'm pretty confident in my computer. It's been pretty accurate, LX5000, and the polars that I have in there seem to work pretty well. So off to the races here on final glide. You'll notice here Derek makes a lot of huge bumps on the way down, and I'm making less, and D and Romeo are making pretty big bumps as well. I tend not to pull up as much. And the speeds are pretty high here coming into the final glide once we're probably confident in 400 or 500 feet above. And that's probably way higher than we need to be, but I remember thinking that. Here we are about 10 miles away, 15 miles away from the finish, 6,000 feet high roughly. And Derek's right behind me, and D and Romeo are stretched out a little bit. And I think they've basically committed, and they're putting the hammer down. D and the big pull-up there is slowing down. So we're still pretty much going here at cruising speed. JS1 coming in on his final glide here. And looking back, ST well behind, Ox well behind, and Dennis is back there. And this gives you a good sense of scale. I think that at this point we were pushing pretty hard. D's up to 135 knots. Romeo's 150 knots, and I'm picking it up at 130 knots, and Derek is going as well, but he's fallen back just a little bit. And one more speed check here. Derek putting the hammer down there a little bit, so Derek's up to 135. Basically 130 final glide here. I'm 130 and Romeo 123, and he's the lowest of the bunch. And here we come in for the finish, and sorting out our pattern to land here. Romeo, Fox 2 and Tango Tango just kind of follow each other in. And in is coming Sierra Tango, so interesting lesson there that deviation definitely cost him, even though we found a 5-knot thermal. And DL here, I'll switch over to him, struggled. He sort of left alone back here, and got low. He's down to 2,600 feet by himself, no cues from other gliders, and eventually struggles it out and lands out here at this airport. I couldn't find a suitable climb, and was the one lane out for the day. And 2,000 feet is roughly 700 feet above the ground, maybe a little less. And here's the commit to land out. So that is the task. Hope you enjoyed it.